Amor Maclang is a globally award-winning brand architect, experienced risk, crisis, reputation strategist, movement maker, and marketing and communications innovator. An internationally awarded champion of marketing as a force for good, her projects demonstrate that you can hit your business goals while still doing good for the country. She is the first communications professional in the country to become an ISO 31000 crisis management practitioner, one of the only professionals ever to be accomplished in both marketing and crisis management. She is also a certified enterprise risk management professional as awarded by the International Institute of Executive Training. As a champion for innovations, Amor is the chair for innovations of the European Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, and she also co-founded Geiser Maclang, one of the leading PR, marketing, communications, public affairs, and risk issues and crisis management companies in the Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, let's all welcome our moderator, Ms. Amor Maclang.
Thank you so much, Sophia and LJ. More importantly, I would like to greet everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, from wherever you're calling or transmitting from. In behalf of the European Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, the Chamber of Choice here in the Philippines, we would like to welcome everyone as we come together and discuss what is the future of work. So that seems to be the foremost question in the minds of many employers and employees alike as the economy slowly reopens here in Asia. I was in touch recently with clients and partners from Singapore who mentioned that in August, Singapore will be hosting the World Economic Forum, and everyone will literally be in a bubble. So as they redefine the future of MICE, we're also seeing how the future of work is being redefined. About 70 to 80% of companies that have been interviewed in a research study have signified that working from home will become a fixture in their operations. And prior to the pandemic and the lockdown, it does seem that things have been going that way. As a matter of fact, if you think about it, remote working is actually not new. The Roman Empire actually founded their beginnings and their foundations on remote working. And at that time, they didn't have Zoom or Skype or even the telephone to help them. As of 2019, about 1.5 million Filipinos are already working full-time in their homes. And I can only imagine that that number has precipitously increased with COVID-19 and its ensuing changes. But is work from home or remote work truly the answer? It is true that many Filipinos have initially welcomed it as a way to keep safe or even spare themselves from traffic. However, reports have also increased about issues that show that this situation is not really the most ideal. But we are now looking for a middle ground where work from home can now synergize, and also we're looking to limit the adverse effects that comes with it. Now, we're so excited to welcome our very special guest this afternoon. First time the various chambers, ECC, ECCs all over Asia Pacific are coming together. But before we move to the meat and potatoes of this afternoon, it is my honor to welcome the ECCP, one of the ECCP board directors, Mr. Francisco Paco Romero Milan, to deliver a brief message and introduce our guest speaker. Paco?
Thank you, Amor. As the theme of today's session suggests, organizations are grappling with the question of what the future of work will look like for quite some time. Technological advancements, changing workforce expectations, shifting demographic trends, and geopolitical risks are all converging to create new realities of work. These realities present both challenges and opportunities on how stakeholders can work together to shape a sustainable future that not only enhance productivity and create value, but also enable people, business, and society to thrive. That's what we hope to better understand today, specifically on how the growth of hybrid work is reimagining the future of work and redesigning workspaces against a backdrop of the ongoing global health crisis. We are proud to present this new series of up and close online fireside chat called C-Suite Conversations that will feature top business leaders, prominent political figures, and other influential thought leaders exchanging ideas and best practices on some of the most pressing issues, including today's subject that is highly important to the European business community in the region and in Europe. To kick off this series, we are humbled to be joined by one of the most well-known business icons in the service, office, and flexible workspace industry, Mark Dixon. Mark Dixon is the CEO and founder of International Workplace Group, or IWG, and is one of Europe's well-known entrepreneurs. Since founding the Regis Group in Brussels, Belgium in 1989, Mark has achieved a formidable reputation for leadership and innovation. Prior to Regis and IWG, he established businesses in the retail and wholesale food industries. A recipient of several awards for enterprise, Mark has revolutionized the way business approaches its property needs with his vision of the future of work. Before I turn it over back to Amor and Mark, I would also like to take the opportunity to acknowledge our partner European chambers in Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Singapore, Taiwan, Thailand, and Vietnam for the incredible support and for this initiative and for making today's session possible. Back to you, Amor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paco. And I think at this point, everyone is eager, as I am, to welcome our guest, Mr. Mark Dixon, as we jump straight into our discussion. Mark, how are you this morning?
It helps if I'm unmuted.
Yes, that always helps.
Yeah. 1 second. Yes. No thank worries. You very much for that very very warm welcome, and thank you all for joining.
Hi, Mark. You know, over the weekend we've been having a lot of back and forth, and I remember that as early as the latter part of the 1980s, you guys have pioneered flexi office spaces even before this entire trend has taken over the world. And just before the pandemic, the entire conversation surrounding offices has been about open spaces, flexible working, which you guys actually started. I remember telling Lars this, right? That you guys pioneered this as Regis. Now the cycle is coming back all over again, but this time precipitated by the pandemic. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, lots of thoughts, but look, this is a trend that has been some time in the making. You're quite right, but it's a trend that's it's really to do with digital disruption of how people work. So it's not really about real estate. It's about how technology fundamentally changes the way people can work and the way people will work in the future. And this is the thing. I mean, it's interesting, listen to some of the commentary and some of your comments earlier, Amor. So there's a lot of confusion about what this is. Is this something to do with working from home? Yes, a little bit. Is this something to do with working remotely? Yes, it is. And is it something to do with changing the way companies support their people in order for those people to have productive days of work. That's what it's all about. The reality is that your office migrated onto the Microsoft or the Google platform some time back. You just didn't see it happen. But what the pandemic actually caused, it accelerated adoption of technology that was already there. And it showed that companies and people could operate effectively, sometimes even more effectively, using a distributed work platform based on the internet, based on a digital platform, with people working where it's convenient rather than where people were told to go to. And that's the real change. So, work will not be the same again. So, and it was interesting in your comments, Emma, 80% of companies, according to your research there, are reviewing how they support their people going forward. There's a really, really big driver coming from companies. And it's really, again, simple stuff. They know that they can retain productivity. They want to be able to attract more talent. So the easiest way to attract talent or more talent, have more availability, is to be able to look on a wider geography, not a narrow geography. So if you're trying to get people to come into a building in central Manila, then you are limited to people that live in the greater Manila area. Whereas if you were looking for people for your business anywhere in the Philippines, you've got a lot more choice, a lot more talent there. And equally for the Philippines, there'll be a lot more Filipinos that will be working for overseas companies, maybe from home, maybe in the countryside, so long as you have, notwithstanding the internet is good enough. It's going to change the geography. So for companies, they can get more talent. They save money. They save about 50% of their cost. Hybrid working delivers a 50% cost save. That's compelling, especially with the economy that we're going into. Very, very big thing for companies is sustainability. If you're a public company in particular, it is the big driver. All investors' first question now isn't how much money have you made and what's your expectations for the future. It's what are you doing? What's your sustainability program? It is absolutely there today. And of course, if you stop people commuting and have less office space that's fixed, you fulfill that. And then finally, it's what a lot of people want. Again, the workers themselves, to force workers to travel long distances at great cost in both time and money for jobs that they could equally do locally, or working at a local workplace or at home, doesn't make any sense to both the people and the company. So there's a lot, it's a very common sense move that's been accelerated by COVID, that had already started in 2019 and the early part of 2020. The pandemic just made it take off.
Yes, allow me to unpack a lot of what you said. And let's start off with the importance of remote work and technology. We know that an important precursor to all of the remote work has been the technology companies. And actually, many of the legacy companies, even prior to COVID, have fancied themselves to be technologically driven. They pivoted to being more technologically driven. I was actually monitoring prior to the start of the pandemic how IWG signed a global partnership with Dimension Data to launch cutting-edge cloud computing platform with security at its core. So many of the companies are wondering and are very tentative about it, primarily because of the security issue.
Look, just to look at the technology and security. it is something that, basically you have to think about it a different way. Companies have to focus on security and cybersecurity anyway. Whether people, you have to look at it if you're going to have people working from home, you have to look at things in a different way. You have to think about every one of those homework situations has to be as secure as when people are in an office and so on. So we provide a lot of security along with data and others to make that work so that you can effectively support people with the right technology, with the right level of security. But the entire approach takes a rethink of how you're running your business. So if you are going to have remote workers of any kind, you have to relook at how you talk about your company, how you communicate with your team and your teams. And you have to rethink things like security because, people are leaving papers around in a busy household. There has to be new protocols. So, again, this is a time for creativity. It's a time of change. And, we think that it's will be one of the biggest changes that comes out of the pandemic will be this fundamental change away from the old way of working to a new way of working.
There are two things that you mentioned that I'd like to jump on, and that would be, the soft side of working in real estate is now becoming the dominant side of it. In other words, culture. You talked about process, and you talked about the importance of communications. No, how do you figure the role of IWG and also maybe of corporations in general? And the need to develop a more pronounced corporate culture. What steps are you taking to help your clients grow towards this direction, Mark?
Well, I think, look, first of all, it's our job to provide a platform that works. We're effectively an infrastructure provider. So we can make all these different workplaces, whether it's a local workplace, whether it's a central workplace, and whether it's a home workplace. Hybrid working is about making all of those work together so that the worker is properly supported and it's all about productivity. I mean, anyone on this call that is running a business, you want to get the most out of your people, and you want your people. Secondly, you want to have, that people are more productive if they're happy, they're communicated to, and they feel they're part of something. And that is the challenge more. So companies are already investing more. So the human resource department has become somewhat of a marketing and communications department. And they're focusing more time and effort on how do we communicate our purpose? How do we communicate our values to a brand new worker that no one's ever seen before because they've never ever come to the office? And so it's very, very interesting to interact with human resources department who have transformed themselves. And we work, one of the principal partners when we do these big implementations, and we've signed up more than 1 million new members in the past 8 weeks because the trend is gathering pace. We interact more with the human resources department than we do with the real estate department. It's very interesting. And so this is all about people in the end. You give people what they want, they will be more productive, you'll have a better company. But you have to put some investment, some creativity into it to make sure that it works. It doesn't happen on its own.
Yes, thank you. At the end of the day, it's really all about people. And speaking of people and the movement of people, Prior to you coming on, we were having a discussion with Lars and my executive director, Florian, about the growth of office spaces. You say it's in the suburbs, and here in the islands, we're just more than happy to grow more offices in the islands, right?
Yeah.
You talked about the importance of the kind of governmental policy at the local government units, right? That make it, that make it successful. What would you suggest should the local government policies be at the minimum in order to make a work from home or a flexible office setup successful?
Look, it's if we're talking here about the Philippines or any country, and we can see it, probably the most advanced country in the world in terms of supporting this is France. And France are very, very good at infrastructure. As a country, they're very good at it. Now, in the Philippines, let's just take the Philippines, or any country, very simple recipe: internet, provide workplaces, allow permissions for workplaces close to where people live. So in the same places that you would be putting fast food or other things which are at the center of conurbations, the center of populations, you need to support local workplace, so that whether that's on the islands in the Philippines, and as you know, we've been opening on many of the islands, or whether that's the suburbs of Metro Manila, it is about allowing work to take place wherever it's convenient to people. It's getting people off the roads. It's stopping time being wasted and families being disrupted by long commutes. So again, remember, the underlying story here in the next 10 years will be the environment. Once COVID's gone, let's hope it passes away quite quickly. It will all be about the environment in the Philippines, in Asia, worldwide. That's where the focus will lie. So local governments will have to focus. There will have to be a policy of saying anyone in the Philippines should be able to find somewhere to work close to where they live, and they should have good quality internet at home or very close to where they live. And that's it. It's a really simple recipe, all linked up. It can regenerate the rural parts of any country and sort of equal out the development in a country away from a few big cities to it being a much flatter, a much more balanced development across a country. And that's what counts.
I'm going to quote you on that. So instead of it being location, it's now internet. I love it. Yes. Have you noticed any particular vertical or industry that has embraced this sort of setup most aggressively?
Well, as you would expect, look, everyone adopted it pretty quickly last year. I mean, it was quick. It was amazing how quickly companies were able to pivot to this new way of working. But remember, the technology was already there. It was on most people's computers already. But the first adopters, the quickest adopters within days, were the digital firms. They're already very digital savvy. So they were already adopting more flexible work methods prior to the pandemic. So easy acceleration for them. But that came very soon after. You had companies that you wouldn't have thought would be able to operate in a digital way that started to. Marketing companies, very creative firms where they're creating content, started to work using more enhanced versions of the technology to create content. They did it online without being all together in a building or a room. Architects firms, tough one on architecture, but they started to do it. So in the end, it was forced upon everyone. So all industries have embraced it. But we see quite a clear division coming in the future, where there will be some companies all companies will be able to have some of their people working in a hybrid way, but some companies will need to have the very, very creative parts of their team probably need to come together, not every day, but from time to time, to do, really, really interactive creation, which can be hard on, on using technology. But let me just say that the amazing thing about this technology revolution that's happened is that the whole speed of business has increased. You can have meetings pretty much, you decide in the morning, and subject to those people being available, and they normally are, you can have a meeting in the afternoon. In the old days, that was when you had to travel for business. That was tough. You were planning your, if I came to Asia, for example, I'd be planning the trip for a month before, or longer. So it speeded up business. It's changed the way companies work. It's for most people some of the time, and some people all of the time. And for a group, there's groups of people that it doesn't work for all the time. So this whole new landscape you're going to see, and I think, if I may add another point or more, for those of you that have teenagers or young adults, so if you've got someone that's sort of under, I'm going to say 20, these guys will use technology to communicate to someone that's actually sitting 5 meters away. They'll communicate on the dinner table, if you let them, from one end of the table to the other. The next generation coming through, they are digital natives. This sort of working's just normal for them. So if when they come into the workplace, if you start suggesting that they have to travel long distances to go use a computer and a phone, they'll say, no, that doesn't make any sense. So, again, the changes happen universally. It will become more and more entrenched. And, my prediction is in 15 years' time, 10 years' time, possibly even 5 years' time, people will look back and say, how on earth did we used to work like that? That was pre-digital, pre-COVID.
It's interesting you mentioned about millennials, right? Because it does seem like while they are digital natives, they're also reeling from the effects of the pandemic and this new situation, right? So the converse is also true. They are having a difficult time adjusting. So they're at this particular juncture. We're in this 24/7, always on, right? This always on setup is also taking a toll on them. Those of us who are non-millennials seem to be more agile in terms of coping with this. How do you suggest the new work environment cope with this, especially in dealing with millennials who seem to be extremely overwhelmed?
Yeah, look, I would say that I have been completely overwhelmed as well. You sort of, in terms, it's both ends of the spectrum. For me, not being a digital native, there's a lot to take in, and certainly over the past year, I've squeezed 3 years into 1 year. You're doing a lot more because, I used to travel quite a bit. Maybe a third of my year would be traveling. At least you get a break when you're actually sitting on a plane. And so that's gone. You're just working nonstop. Now, for millennials, it's an interesting challenge because for anyone coming into the workplace, it's advantageous that those people can work with someone else and watch other people doing things. So a lot of young people, in fact, all workers learn by observing rather than learning in a classroom or learning on the internet. So really, really quite important, that sort of physical interaction. However, what we're seeing companies doing is creating that. So we've seen a lot of very good work with HR departments who are creating buddy systems where they're saying for new intake who they've never seen face to face because the office is closed, they're buddying them up with 2 or 3 seasoned people, and they sort of work together doing a lot on Zoom or Teams. So, and they attend meetings and they listen to what's going on and they can see those people working. It more so than if they were sort of having to try and pick that up from one side of a room to another. So, companies are adopting ways to train differently. Online training has got much better. But in the end, you have to get what we're also seeing companies doing, and they're investing more in, is getting people together. You don't need them together every day, but you get them together once a week, once a fortnight, once a month. You bring people together with a good agenda, not just bring people together, but say, like, we've got these new people, we've got these people we want to bring in. How do we do that? Let's have an agenda. Let's talk about our business. Let's make sure we impose a sense of purpose into the whole team, because everyone can become a digital nomad if you allow it to happen. So how do we do this? How do we embrace this? So again, I repeat my comments of earlier, Amor. It is the HR department working with marketing and communicating, bringing people in, sense of involvement, sense of passion. It is possible to do, but you have to put effort in. Now, the final part that you cannot reproduce is socializing, which is important, I think, not just for young people, but for everyone in the workplace. It's that ability to get together and after work, maybe go for a drink, go for a meal. This is a very important part of the training. And it's a very important part of how experienced people get their knowledge to less experienced people, because it's a more informal way for questions to be asked and you get to know people. So again, what we see companies doing is they set up collaboration days, and then you sort of have you have a meal and drinks at the end of it, and they make sure that it's a little bit more organized to make sure that people are actually there and it's inclusive. It's not just small groups. It's a more curated type of activity, because it is important. And again, finally, for hybrid work is about the convenience of working. So it's not to say you have to work at home or you have to work locally. You can also work at the company's hub office or head office. It doesn't really matter. You can choose where you're going to be most productive. And modern companies, that's what they're adopting. They're saying, look, if you want to come into the downtown office, no problem, you can. But you don't have to. We just want a productive day's work from you, and we want you to add value to helping build our company and look after our customers, whatever it may be.
Yes, thank you. The pandemic did not seem to slow you down any one bit. From acquisitions, from Copernico to the Wing, IWG seems to be expanding more and more and hyper specializing in working flexible environments. Could you share a little bit about these choice acquisitions, Mark?
Well, I think, look, it's very nice of you. It shows that looks can deceive. Last year was the toughest year since I founded the business 31 years ago. Very, very, just tougher than any recession. I've been through quite a few recessions around the world, nearly 30, and 2 big ones. This is the biggest. And the repercussions from it, I think, are still yet to be fully felt. But so very difficult year, but a year also of opportunity. So the good news is, as a company, we were very well financed at the beginning. We were very successful at the beginning. We had our best first quarter in any year in our 30-year history, right at the beginning of 2020. So it helps if you came into this with momentum and you had a very strong balance sheet. So we have continued to expand, in particular in the suburbs and in the rural areas where we can see that more and more companies want to employ and support their people much closer to where they live. It just makes so much economic sense. So we've continued to grow there, and we've continued to add centers also in the CBDs, in the city districts, because even though we have a lot there, and even though that's the toughest place to be, we know that people will come back to the city. So every one of those rural workers, the suburban workers, will need to have an office 1 or 2 days a month in the city. So it's not, location becomes a much more fluid idea. You choose where you need to be and you go there. So we needed more in the cities as well. So it has been, in particular, as we've come into 21, a big year for growth. And we've got a lot more coming as more and more companies. Remember, we've just signed up in the last 8 weeks, more than 1 million new users. We need more space. So we've got the two challenges on at the same time.
How ironic that is, that with everyone's been predicting the shrinkage in the need for real estate, and yet you just said we need more spaces. You know how flex spaces used to be a conversation for startups that were reclaimed by the startup environment, and like I said, you guys have actually pioneered this, but it seems like it's the behemoth organizations who are needing to become more agile and are needing more of the flex space setup. Who would you consider amongst your clients, only if you're at liberty to share, have really taken advantage and have really grown by leaps and bounds, adopting the flex space setup, at least on the larger scale side?
Well, we've seen a lot of the major banks, like Standard Chartered. It's very public what they've done. They're looking to reduce the size of their footprint by 50%. Remember, huge cost savings, and they're very focused on the environment. It's high on their agenda. And banks are becoming more digital overall. You just don't need as much space, because a lot more of the actual work takes place in cyberspace. It's not carried out in office buildings anymore. So, that's one. And then you've got digital companies, big customers ours like Cisco, Salesforce.com, NTT you mentioned earlier, the whole variety of the governments. We've got the UK government, we've got the US government, because they're all very focused on the environment as well. So governments themselves are saying, look, why are we forcing our people to commute all over the place to come to offices when they can do the job just as well from where they are? And they also have an environmental and, of course, a cost agenda. So it's pretty widespread. Just coming back to your comments about real estate itself in central business districts, we are looking for space, but overall, in 5 years' time, there will be less use of office space. This may not be for a place like Manila, for example, which is still growing without the outsourcing business, more companies, more startups, more development. But worldwide, in some of the more mature cities, where they've become very, very expensive, places like London, New York, San Francisco, there will be a definite reduction in the amount of occupied square meters by companies in office. And that's just because it's inconveniently situated It's very expensive to get to. It's very expensive to own and operate, and people can do their jobs from anywhere. So whilst we may be expanding, we're expanding because other companies are contracting, but want to keep a smaller presence that's flexible. So many companies have moved over to us in places like New York. They've closed down a large office and they keep a core office. Everyone else is working from all over the United States, but they need places to get people together, and that's what they're using us for.
You talked about the need. Before I open up the floor to the audience, the questions are coming in for you, Mark. You talked about the need for lower carbon footprints, and it seems like the thrust of many organizations to enhance their ESG agenda, their environment, social, and governance agenda, has really been conducive to this reduction in office footprint, no?
Yes.
I've never seen a happy commuter in my life, right? And then I was listening to an interview, and you're absolutely right. How do you see the future of traditional offices vis-a-vis all of the movement towards ESG?
Well, look, in this, there's two things happening. First of all, as you said, and as I've said, ESG high on the agenda. But look, for white collar, if you have a lot of white collar office workers, you know, for someone like Standard Chartered, if they halve their real estate footprint, they halve their carbon footprint, you know, just in one go. And that is a huge development. I mean, it's great to think about, apart from it just being a target, it's great for the environment. If on top of that, you can stop people commuting, then you have a double whammy. You have two effects occurring. And also ESG also is about people's well-being. And if people can spend more time with their families, you know, and many people in places like London or New York and Manila will be spending more than 2 hours a day commuting. And that's not good for family life. You know, you don't get home in time at night to see your kids, and you don't see them in the morning because you're leaving too early and you're getting back too late. So, you know, the whole concept of it is very attractive from an ESG point of view. And, you know, I think the second part to this, Amor, is buildings themselves. I mean, we are focusing on buildings that are as carbon neutral as possible. It's very difficult to get them completely neutral. We have to buy offsets, but you can get closer. And with modern construction techniques and some of the new buildings we're building have more or less a zero footprint if we can build those buildings new. And these are the buildings we're putting up in the rural areas where, you know, we can use things like ground heat, and there's lots more possibilities to actually reduce the overall footprint. So it's also very high on our agenda, you know, in short.
To build from scratch and to make sure that they conform to a lower carbon footprint. Very good. Speaking of which, now I would be opening the floor for questions coming from the audience. Miss Elenita Bantiling is wondering, how will IWG adapt in terms of workplace design in this new normal? How do you envision? Let's look into Mark's crystal ball. How will offices look like in 12 to 24 months from now?
Well, this is one of the things we've been busy with, Elenita, over the past 12 months. I mean, we've been working on new designs. Those prototypes have already been launched and they're very successful. So one of the things we've done a completely green interior of an office. So it's the prototype launch, we're now doing more, had more than 5,000 plants in in the space. It's all completely open. It has a very, very low footprint for energy. And also we're working on clean air, which having a lot of plants can help a great deal on. So, you know, and also divisions, trying to create divisions that don't divide people. So trying to create atmosphere without having everyone together. So we've done a lot of work on design. So the designs will change. Look, an office is an office. The standard, if you want an office for one person, you want an office for 5 people. Those haven't changed a lot. But it's the more open spaces have changed a great deal. We've also launched new types of office package, collaboration rooms. As I mentioned earlier, when what's really important for companies is that you stop your people becoming digital nomads that go off into the desert. You've got to bring them together, and you need a sign over the door. You need to have space that works to bring those people together. So this was a new product that we launched earlier on this year, which is becoming, as people come back, becoming more and more popular. So design has changed. Our designs always evolve. We expect, but they've evolved very quickly in the past 12 months.
Mark, there's a question here from Yesung Yoon. Can you share your strategy and vision for growth for post-COVID in East Asia? Actually, if I may just reframe that a bit, have you noticed if there are varying strategies that are emerging in various regions all over the world? Have you noticed any difference? Beginning with East Asia.
Yeah, look, the differences are caused. This is a question that would take me a day to answer, because I mean, workers are workers, companies are companies, but culture is the thing that divides people. So what people are used to, what the culture is, really, really quite important. So, but look, I would say to you that pretty much 80% of what everyone does globally is the same. And you get this, about 20% can change down to either the geography. Very often I come back to the internet, is how good the internet is. It changes by how large people's homes are and how easy it is for them to work at home. Let me give you an example there. In California was the worst affected part of the United States, not New York. New York was terrible, but it was California. And the reason for the office use, and this is because in California, commuting is terrible. There's almost no public transport. Everyone has to get in their car and fight traffic to get to an office that's never in the right place. And people's homes in California, conversely, are larger, and it's a nice climate. You can go and sit in the garden. You can, your home is bigger. You can have a home office in most homes in California, and apartments are larger. The internet's good. No problem working with home. In fact, the big advantage is because you don't have to commute. So it's going to be harder in somewhere like California to get people back into an office if you ask them to. Conversely, what we've seen in places like China, where you have very good internet, but apartments are smaller, people want to come into the office because you generally don't have as much space, much living space. So, but anyway, coming back to the strategy, our strategy is very similar globally. And for East Asia, pretty much globally, it is all about getting the coverage so that basically for whether that's the Philippines, whether that's East Asia, or any country, it's about providing places to work that are convenient to people rather than convenient to companies. And saying, a company then can have their people just work from anywhere. It just becomes a flexible thing, truly flexible.
I have a question here from my good friend, Mr. Marshall Beck. former executive director of the ECCP. What advice, and with your permission, Marshall, I'm going to reframe the question. What advice, Mark, would you give those organizations who have, prior to the pandemic, purchased large amounts of real estate, right? How do you see them addressing the new normal?
That's a tough one. Look, well, it depends where it is. Look, if you're in London, you need to be thinking about alternative uses. I used to live in the United States, in Connecticut. In Connecticut, the taxes are very high. There was a lot of office use in Connecticut 30 years ago, but it pretty much halved because of taxes. Everyone moved out down to the south of the United States. So there's a lot of office buildings that were repurposed into more leisure activities. I used to take my son to a woodwork class in a fantastic office building, ground floor. So, it depends where that space is, but I think some places are going to be more hit than others. If the space was in Manila, for example, less concerned because that is a growth country. So, maybe there'll be less new space built, but the space that's there will be even more popular, because remember, all companies have a core that they will need to have in central Manila, for example. But you really need to think about your strategy. And again, now is now, but the thing all companies need to be thinking about is 3 years time, 5 years time. Real estate tends to be a long-term play. You're signing up leases for longer terms, less so in East Asia. Luckily leases are shorter, but still you have to start thinking forward to say, how are we going to be effective? How are we going to be working? If this is what's happened today, what will 3 years time look like? What will the new norm look like? We don't want to be sitting there with too much real estate. So, but if you bought it, it very much depends on the geography. There are some places where it's going to be extremely difficult to get people to come to that space maybe in 3 years' time.
Thank you, Mark. I can't believe that's about the time we have, and I'm already being signaled by our friends from ECCP. Mark, I'd like to turn it over to you for closing words to the almost 7 regions all over Asia who's come to join us this morning and this afternoon. Mark?
Okay. Well, thanks, Emma. Look, thank you everyone for joining. Look, it really comes back to that last question. This is time, business. I've been in business a long time, more than 40 years, 45 years in business. And things change. What you think is normal today becomes something quite different tomorrow. So the key thing on this, and a lot of the questions and your comments, Emma, it's about how do I adapt my business to take advantage of these new changes? Can I have less real estate? Can I have better performing people? Can I get talent from more places? And if you can, but you have to rethink it now in order to have a more successful business, let's say, in 2 or 3 years' time. But it is a time of opportunity, and change always brings opportunity, in my experience.
Yes, and coming from a risk, issues, and crisis perspective, in China specifically, the characters for both crisis and opportunity is one and the same. And I think if there's something that the pandemic has taught us all, is that the ultimate winner in all of these changes are the employees and the people who, at the end of the day, was really at the front and center of the IWG agenda. Maraming salamat, Mr. Mark Dixon. And you could be rest assured, this is not the last time we shall darken your doorstep. Thank you so much. And I would like to thank everyone from the various European chambers who joined us this afternoon. And we look forward to having you once again in the next C-suite conversations. Mabuhay at maraming salamat po. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you so
Bye-bye.
much, Mark. Please stay
Thanks,
well.
Emma. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Lars. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And that ends C-Suite Conversations, the future of work with IWG PLC CEO Mark Dixon. We thank Mark, Amor, Paco, and our attendees for participating in today's dialogue. The C-Suite Conversation is the first in a series of up-close expert calls where guests dig deep into trending topics in their field. Keep an eye out for the next C-Suite Conversation on www.eccp.com or ECCP social media pages. Thank you, and we wish you a pleasant and safe week ahead.